John Boyd Jr. claims poor planting, supply chain issues, and higher prices for seeds, fertilizer, and fuel are taking a very heavy toll on U.S. farmers. He cautioned that Americans will likely see a shortage in food items and skyrocketing prices by the end of this summer.
If one day you walk into your regular grocery store and can't find a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, or a bag of fresh vegetables, it's not just a temporary shortage. It's a warning sign, a quiet, creeping collapse of something far bigger: American agriculture. Farms in the U.S. were once a symbol of prosperity and pride, where every harvest marked a step forward for the nation. But now fields are drying up, not just from drought, but from debt worker shortages and a loss of faith. Farmers aren't planting because even a full harvest can't pay the bills anymore. You might live hundreds of miles away in a big city, but when the food supply chain begins to crack, it will hit your dinner plate no matter who you are. And these 10 everyday foods, so familiar, so foundational, are quietly vanishing from American tables. This time, there may be no turning back. Avocados. In California, where sunshine was once the golden ticket of agriculture, avocados are now falling to the ground. Untouched. Not because no one wants them, but because the people who grow them can no longer afford to keep going. America's avocado industry is quietly facing a slow, painful collapse. In places like Ventura and San Diego, once the pride of American produce orchards, are now full of dead trees, broken branches, and abandoned irrigation lines. One small farm had to lay off dozens of seasonal workers because labor costs skyrocketed. Another had to auction off its equipment just to cover the electricity bill. But the real heartbreak: farmers aren't walking away because there's no market. They're walking away because the system they trusted no longer has their back. The H-2A farm worker visa program isn't flexible enough. Operating costs keep rising, and unless the fruit meets strict export standards, there's virtually no place left to sell it. What does the average American see? A bag of avocados that used to cost $2.03 now goes for $6 or $7 in some places. Worse, the quality is slipping. Imported avocados may look perfect, but they lack the rich, creamy flavor California avocados are known for. And somehow families are now paying more for fruit grown just a few hundred miles away that they still can't even access. Think it's just an avocado. Try imagining millions of them left unpicked, thousands of workers out of a job, hundreds of farms forced into indefinite shutdown, and a supply chain from fertilizer to packaging to transportation teetering on the edge because American avocados are disappearing. Even worse, this isn't just about avocados. It's a warning. The first crack in a much bigger collapse, starting with the kind of crops we once assumed would always be there morning to night on every American table. Corn. In the heart of America, the roar of harvesters in the summer used to be a sign corn season had arrived and the nation was about to be fed. But this year that sound is missing. Not because the harvest is done, but because there's barely anything left to harvest. Corn isn't just another crop. It's the backbone of the entire American food system. From livestock feed to breakfast cereal, from cornmeal and sweeteners to snacks, tortillas, and even ethanol, it's nearly impossible to go a single day in the US without consuming corn in some form. But tens of thousands of farmers across the Midwest are now watching their dreams wither under the sun. Fertilizer prices are sky high. Fuel costs are brutal. Labor is scarce. Families who've grown corn for 3 generations are now selling off pieces of their land to real estate developers just to stay ahead of the bank. One Iowa farm that used to plant 500 acres of corn had to cut back by half this year and lay off 3 workers. A grower in Illinois canceled his trucking contract altogether, saying there's nothing left to ship. The harsh truth: the corn didn't fail. The economics did. And the very people who once fed this country are now drowning in a system they helped build. And you, the consumer, you'll feel it too. A box of cereal just went up another $2. Your favorite corn-based snack bag looks half full but costs more than ever. Families with young kids who once relied on corn-based staples like canned meals or cheap frozen food now have to double-check every item on the receipt. Corn isn't just food, it's stability. And that stability is now cracking at the core, right where it used to be strongest, the American heartland. And here's the chilling part: if the most widely grown crop in the US can't survive this economy, what about the one that always grew beside it, its lifelong companion in every field? How much longer can that crop hold on? Soybeans. When most people think of soybeans, they picture soy milk or vegetarian meals. But in the world of American agriculture, soybeans are a strategic crop quietly woven into nearly every link of the food supply chain. Meat, eggs, dairy, cooking oil, canned goods, and even biofuel. Yet for American farmers, soybeans are no longer the green gold they once called it. It's become a burden, one they can no longer afford to carry. For years, U.S. soybeans were a top export to China, Europe, and Southeast Asia. But after trade wars, tariffs, and global supply chain breakdowns, American soy has been trapped, stuck in silos across the country. Farmers grow it, but no one's buying. Exports have dried up. Cheaper imports flood the domestic market, and processing plants are shutting down one by one, unable to stay profitable. In Missouri, a major farmers cooperative that once produced over 2 million tons of soybeans annually has slashed output by 40%. Smaller operations have pulled the plug, entirely choosing to let fields go fallow rather than lose money on every acre. As one farmer put it, "Better to leave the land empty than burned cash we'll never see back. You might think it's just one crop, how bad could it be? But when soybeans vanish, everything else stumbles. Feed prices for chickens, cows, and pigs surge. Cooking oil and margarine kitchen staples for millions spike. Food companies are forced to reformulate products or scale back production entirely. For American consumers, this isn't about nickels and dimes. It's about losing access to everyday essentials. A single mother in Kansas said she used to cook with soybean oil every week. Now she's using it sparingly because the price has doubled. A family-owned diner in Arkansas had to take fried food off the menu. They simply couldn't break even. Meanwhile, farmers are trapped in a lose-lose choice: keep planting and dig themselves into deeper debt, or stop altogether and watch their local economies dry up. No harvest means no workers, no loan payments, and eventually no say in the future of the land passed down through generations. No soybeans means no animal feed. No animal feed, and the food chain begins to fall apart. And when that breakdown starts with something so invisible in our daily lives, it's more dangerous than we realize. But it won't stop there. Because when a crop stops being profitable, the one right beside it, the one that's been a part of every American breakfast table for decades, is next in line. And it's already starting to disappear from your grocery store's refrigerated section. Milk and dairy products. There's nothing more ordinary than a glass of milk in the morning. But in 2025, that simple staple is turning into a luxury for millions of American families. The U.S. dairy industry, once the pride of states like Wisconsin, Idaho, and New York, is now in crisis mode. Family farms are shutting down at a rapid pace. Cows are being sold off, even sent to slaughter just to cut losses. Barns that used to buzz with milking machines now sit cold and empty with nothing left but unpaid bank loans and fading memories. Why? Partly because the cost of raising dairy cows has skyrocketed from feed and fuel to labor. Yet the price farmers are paid for milk doesn't even come close to covering what it takes to produce it. But there's a deeper issue the Farm Bill has stalled. The financial safety nets that once helped dairy farmers stay afloat in hard times have either disappeared or been severely slashed. Without that lifeline, many small and mid-sized farms have no choice but to let go. In Vermont, a farm that had been raising 120 dairy cows and supplying 3 local supermarkets just shut down after 47 years. The owner, now in his 60s, sold the land to a developer building luxury vacation homes. In Pennsylvania, a younger farmer posted on social media that he was completely burnt out after realizing his entire month's profit didn't even cover the electric bill for keeping the milk cold. And for consumers, it's not just about prices going up, it's about milk becoming harder to find. In parts of the Midwest, stores have started limiting how much milk you can buy. Chains are quietly warning that they can't promise consistent stock of whole milk, low-fat milk, or even shelf-stable cartons. Meanwhile, dairy-based items like cheese butter and yogurt are rising so fast in cost that bakeries and restaurants are either pulling recipes or hiking up menu prices. One public school district in Ohio announced it would no longer serve chocolate milk with school lunches. It's simply too expensive. That might seem minor, but for many low-income families, that carton of milk was the only source of calcium their child got each day. Behind every missing jug of milk on the shelf, there's a locked-up barn, a farmer overwhelmed by bills, a kid drinking tap water instead of milk at school lunch. And if an industry as stable as dairy is falling this hard, what hope is there for sectors even more fragile like livestock, where one outbreak or disruption could wipe out entire operations overnight? Eggs. They used to be the easiest thing to grab at any grocery store, a dozen eggs a few bucks, and you were set for breakfast all week. But in 2025, even this simple staple is turning into a luxury in the American shopping cart. The egg industry is now caught in a devastating double crisis disease and a massive labor shortage. Since 2022, more than 60 million birds have been culled due to the spread of the deadly H5N1 avian flu, and it's not letting up. New outbreaks continue to surface, faster and more destructive than ever, especially in key egg-producing states like Iowa, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. In Des Moines, one major farm that used to supply nearly 400,000 eggs per week is now operating at just a quarter of that. Half the flock was destroyed, but even with the birds they have left, keeping the operation running has become a nightmare. There aren't enough workers to collect, pack, or ship the eggs. Immigrant laborers have been deported or quit due to unsafe conditions, and few are willing to take their place for low wages and high risk of infection. On top of that, feed costs have exploded with corn and soy also in crisis. It's a downward spiral: fewer hens, fewer eggs, higher prices, lower demand. Farms go out of business. For everyday Americans, the impact couldn't be more visible. In many states, a dozen eggs now costs twice or even 3 times what it did just a year ago. Major chains like Kroger and Safeway have started rationing egg purchases per customer. Small bakeries that rely on fresh eggs daily are either hiking up prices or shutting their doors. Breakfast diners are slashing their menus or substituting cheaper ingredients, and it shows in the taste. At home, families are having to rethink meals. Eggs, once the go-to affordable protein, are no longer a viable option for many working-class households or seniors living on fixed incomes. One retired couple in Ohio said they had to pause buying eggs after prices soared past $6 per dozen, a price they'd only seen during major winter storms in the past. And when even eggs, a symbol of basic, cheap, everyday nourishment, can no longer hold their place on the table, the ripple effect throughout the livestock industry begins to shake. Because what's crumbling isn't just about numbers, it's about the silence settling in across barns that once echoed with the sound of chickens flapping their wings at dawn. Poultry. Chicken used to be the go-to protein for just a few dollars a pound, a true American staple found on dinner tables and fast food trays from coast to coast. But in 2025, what was once the most affordable and accessible meat has become a growing source of anxiety across the country. And the problem isn't just the price, it's the supply. There simply aren't enough chickens left to sell. Avian flu is still tearing through farms, and unlike previous outbreaks, this one is not just killing flocks, it's wiping out livelihoods. Millions of chickens and turkeys were culled in 2024, and the destruction has only continued into this year. What's left behind are empty coops. And farmers, too, afraid to start over. In Georgia, once dubbed the poultry capital of the U.S., more than 15% of small farms have temporarily shut down. Part of the reason is rising costs. Antibiotics feed electricity for cooling systems. All of it has skyrocketed. The other reason? Fear. One positive case of bird flu can trigger a full quarantine, and compensation rarely covers the loss. Then there's the labor crisis, one that's no longer being talked about enough. Jobs like slaughtering meat, processing, and packaging were once handled largely by immigrant workers. But thanks to tighter labor visa policies and ongoing political crackdowns, those workers are disappearing and no one's replacing them. Plants are operating on skeleton crews. Birds are ready, but no one's there to process them. Frozen meat piles up with no trucks to move it. The fallout orders canceled. Contracts broken. Farmers losing their buyers. Processing plants losing their workforce. And regular people losing access to basic food. In the South, major grocery chains are now limiting how much chicken each shopper can buy. Some stores even post signs reading "No drumsticks available, please choose another cut." Boneless chicken breast prices have surged more than 50% since last year. Wings and thighs almost impossible to find in some freezer aisles. A single dad in Texas shared, "I used to feed both my kids chicken for 3 days with $10. Now $10 barely covers half a meal. And behind every cutback dinner, there's a farmer taking out emergency loans just to keep the last of his flock alive. There's a plant running only 3 days a week because it can't find workers. There's a delivery truck sitting idle because there's nothing left to haul. When even essential items like chicken become hard to find, America's agricultural crisis is no longer a warning. It's already here. And that reality hits even harder when you walk into the grocery store and see the produce section, once bursting with green, red, and gold from the land, now reduced to a few wilted trays, and a price board that blinks higher every week. Fresh fruits and vegetables. You can skip fancy meals, cut down on red meat, or stop eating out. But fresh fruits and vegetables, the things that used to be the simplest way to stay healthy, are slowly slipping out of reach for millions of Americans. The truth is, America's produce industry is in more trouble than ever. Not because there isn't enough land, not because people don't want it, but because there aren't enough hands to harvest it. From California and Arizona to Florida, the biggest vegetable growing states in the country, farms are facing a labor freeze. The H-2A visa program, once a lifeline for seasonal workers from Central America, has become a burden with rising costs, complicated paperwork, and endless delays. Meanwhile, a silent wave of deportations has wiped out tens of thousands of farm workers in just a matter of months. The result: strawberries overripe and rotting in the sun because no one's there to pick them. Lettuce wilting in the field. Tomatoes, squash, kale all left behind, not because they won't sell, but because there's no one to get them on the shelf. A spinach farm in Salinas Valley that used to harvest 3 times a year now only manages one. The owner says he's too afraid to invest when he doesn't know if there'll be anyone to pick the crop. A farmer in Yuma, Arizona once called America's salad bowl plowed under his entire vegetable patch because the cost of hiring workers was more than what he'd make. For everyday Americans, the consequences are showing up with every trip to the store. Produce sections are either empty or filled with wilted, overpriced items. A bag of mixed salad that used to cost $3 now goes for over $5. Asparagus, once a rare treat on sale, hasn't been seen for weeks. Schools are cutting back vegetable servings in lunch programs. Seniors who rely on fresh fruit for nutrients are switching to canned goods because that's all their budget allows. This isn't just about food. It's about a country losing its ability to feed itself. Behind every discarded orange is a farmer wondering if it's time to walk away. Behind every empty produce shelf is an American family eating less and feeling worse. And behind it all is a supply chain being suffocated by the very systems that were supposed to protect the people who grow our food. And when even the freshest, healthiest foods are no longer easy to access, you have to ask, how long can the more filling crops, once the pride of America's sun-drenched soil, stay on our dinner plates? Tree nuts. Some foods aren't the centerpiece of a meal, but they represent abundance and health. Tree nuts like almonds, walnuts, and pecans are exactly that. A handful at breakfast, a few roasted almonds on your salad, some crushed walnuts in a muffin. Small things, but they're quietly disappearing from the daily routines of millions of Americans. Not because people lost the taste for them, but because these once accessible staples are becoming too expensive and far too difficult to produce at home. California, New Mexico, Texas. The top nut-producing states are buckling under the double pressure of water shortages and labor shortages. Growing tree nuts isn't like growing vegetables, it takes years of patience. Precise irrigation systems and a skilled, experienced workforce. But this year, thousands of acres of almond trees were cut down. Not because they were diseased, but because farmers couldn't afford to keep them alive. The cost of pumping groundwater has skyrocketed, in some cases outpacing the profits from the entire harvest. Many pecan farms in Texas have been abandoned with brutal heat and relentless drought, throwing the trees off their natural growing cycles. And with tighter restrictions on immigrant labor, the harvest, sorting, and packing process is now stretched to a breaking point. One grower in California's Central Valley cut 60% of his almond acreage in just 1 year. We're not bankrupt yet, but we're close. "Every tree I keep is another day I have to borrow money," he said. Across the industry, nut roasting facilities, oil presses, and nut flour processors are scaling back operations or shutting down entirely. The impact on consumers, immediate. A bag of almonds that once cost $6 is now selling for $10. Granola bars made with pecans are shrinking portions or cutting nuts altogether. Nutrition products for seniors, many of which rely on healthy fats from nuts, are raising prices. Meanwhile, health-conscious Americans are stuck in a no-win situation: either give up or pay double for something that just a year ago was a regular item in their pantry. The painful truth is, this nuts can't be replanted like lettuce. When a walnut tree is cut down, it takes years, sometimes a decade, to grow another. When a nut processing plant shuts its doors, restarting it takes capital, labor, and hope, and all three are in short supply right now. And as Americans begin adjusting to grocery shelves without walnut jars or almond butter, another category of food even more familiar, even more essential, is facing a crisis that's even more fragile than this. Grains and bread. Some things feel too basic to ever disappear, like your morning toast, a bowl of cereal before school, or a pouch of oats that helps a senior stretch their meals through the end of the month. But in 2025, Americans are waking up to a harsh truth: even the most essential staples are slipping out of reach. Wheat, oats, barley, the backbone of America's food industry, are seeing sharp drops in production. Not because of one sudden disaster, but because of a slow, grinding collapse with no clear end in sight. Climate change, skyrocketing input costs, and an outdated farm support system that no longer meets the realities of today's market. In Kansas, North Dakota, and Montana, once known as the country's wheat belt, thousands of acres are being left fallow or planted half-heartedly. Every seed in the ground feels like a gamble. Fertilizer, fuel labor all getting more expensive while wheat prices are undercut by foreign imports. For many farm owners, planting means losing money. Not planting means losing everything. A 4-generation family farm in Nebraska that once milled flour for a national bread chain shut down earlier this year. I didn't quit because I stopped loving the land, the owner said. I quit because the land couldn't feed my family anymore. As farmers step back, grain processing plants are also struggling. There's a shortage of raw materials, unstable energy supplies, and too few workers to keep operations going. A breakfast cereal factory in Iowa cut production by 30% last quarter. A commercial bakery in Minnesota switched to importing flour from Europe, but the shipping costs drove the price of a single loaf up by 40%, and consumers are paying the price. A loaf of basic white bread that used to cost just a few bucks is now pushing $6. A box of kids' breakfast cereal has shrunk in portion but grown in price. Food assistance programs are being forced to trim their lists, unable to guarantee a steady supply of bread for low-income families. For many households, eating breakfast is now a budget decision. For seniors on fixed incomes, a loaf of bread, once the cheapest source of calories, has become something to think twice about. And if you think it stops, then take a look one shelf below. That's where you'll find the bottles of ingredients you use every day, plain, unassuming, not meant to stand out quietly, vanishing from stores, leaving behind a gap that's even harder to fill than an empty bread bin. Cooking oil. Cooking oil, one of the most essential and quietly reliable items in every American kitchen, is slowly becoming a rare commodity in the truest sense. And few realize that behind every missing bottle on a grocery store shelf is the breakdown of an entire agricultural value chain from the fields to the factory floor. Most of the cooking oil consumed in the US comes from just 2 crops, corn and soybeans. But as we've already seen, the supply of both has dropped significantly in 2024 and into early 2025. Skyrocketing costs for fertilizer, fuel, and labor, combined with increasingly erratic weather and shrinking planting acreage, have taken a serious toll. According to USDA reports, U.S. soybean output dropped more than 7% over the past year, while corn acreage in major producing states like Iowa and Illinois also declined as many farmers shifted to lower-risk operations. These are clear warning signs that the supply pipeline for cooking oil is growing dangerously weak. In the Midwest, some soybean and corn oil processing plants have been forced to scale back production due to raw material shortages and cost pressure. The American Food Manufacturers Association reported an average 23% increase in cooking oil prices in 2024, with particularly steep hikes at retail supermarkets across the Northeast and South, where domestic branded oils are in highest demand. And it's not just households feeling the squeeze. Small businesses in the food and beverage industry are also getting hit hard. A survey from Small Business Trends found that over 30% of small and mid-sized restaurants have had to change their menus due to rising oil costs, especially fried and baked items that rely heavily on vegetable oils. Ironically, farmers, the ones growing the crops, are seeing little to no benefit from rising retail prices. Instead, they're getting squeezed on the supply side, struggling with shrinking profit margins, no long-term contracts from processors, and a supply chain that's anything but stable. Small-scale growers can barely keep up, especially with farm bill subsidies still tied up in political gridlock. For American consumers, this all adds up to one harsh new reality. Even a simple bottle of cooking oil now requires second thoughts at checkout. For low-income families, the constant price hikes are forcing hard decisions about what meals they can afford to prepare. And when something as basic as unavoidable as cooking oil is impacted this severely, then it's clear America's agricultural crisis is no longer confined to rural farmland. It's knocking on the door of every kitchen, every supermarket, every grocery receipt across the country. We used to believe that America, with its endless farmland and towering supermarkets, could never run short on food. But what we're seeing now tells a different story. When the farmer falls, the whole country begins to starve quietly. It's not war. It's not a financial collapse. It's the silent unraveling of a broken agricultural system, squeezing the life out of our food chain, from the soil to the supper table. So here's the question: if the most familiar foods are already beginning to disappear, what will be left for our children and grandchildren? This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage secession. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration analysis and sparking conversation based on real-world events, public sentiment, and current social trends. We fully respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal laws. If you found this video helpful, please click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content, where we tell the stories mainstream media often ignores.